Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third night of our four-day digital festival to celebrate the 2020 Women's Prize for Fiction. As always, it's just amazing seeing that there are people watching in Scotland, in Ireland, in Wales, in Bulgaria, in Italy, in America, in Melbourne, in South Africa. It's one of the things that's been a joy is seeing people from all over the world being able to join in with these incredible events. Now, some of you have been here every night and you're very welcome to come back again. Others of you are joining us just for tonight. I'm just going to apologise for my glasses. I've had a lot of comments about the fact that I look as if I'm wearing blue swimming goggles. I've not been able to sort it out, and if I take them off, I can't read my notes. So you'll just have to try to pretend that I'm not sort of bouncing light all over the place. Now, Sunday, we had Hilary Mantel and Angie Cruz talking. Yesterday, it was Maggie O'Farrell and Natalie Haynes. And tomorrow will be the announcement of the 25th Women's Prize for Fiction winner with Martha Lane Fox, pair of judges, which will be, you're going to have to wait till tomorrow to find that out. But just to remind you, it's 7 o'clock kickoff tomorrow. You know, there are many, many ways you can get involved with the prize, and we'd love you to. We're so much enjoying the fact that you are writing to us and feeding back so much. It makes it feel really a community of women readers and writers, and lots of men as well, of course. Our Reading Women campaign has been running all the way through the summer. It's the previous 24 winners of the Women's Prize for Fiction. Everybody's been voting for the one that they most love. I don't say their best book or their favourite, but the one that they most love. And of course, it will carry on till the autumn because the 25th will be added in there. Go to the website if you want to join in. But a podcast is also up on the website and we'll tell you where you can listen to it. And that's been all about a new generation of readers, some of whom, some of the women that have been interviewed on the podcast weren't even born when we started the prize 25 years ago. And it's wonderful hearing how a different generation is reacting to those books. There's lots of inspiration, lots of tips about writing as well. And the final thing, which is very much about our 25th anniversary, so that there was something to celebrate this time, is our Women's Prize Journal. Now, this is a first edition. It's been published by Unbound, and it's all been supported by everybody, all of you, really. You've bought copies of this. There are writing tips, there are reading tips, there are tips from all of our previous winners in there, but most important, there's lots of blank space, and that is for you to begin writing your novel, or your memoir, or your play, or your biography, whatever it is that you've been waiting to do. And 25 years of the Women's Prize, get the journal, lots of blank space, and this time next year you'll have, and that's how it works, sentence after a sentence after a sentence. So go to unbound.com and see how you can join in with that. And it would be lovely to see as many of you joining us for that, and hopefully we'll be doing an event launch as well. But the reason we're here is tonight, the third of our shortlist readings, and we are thrilled to have Bernardine Evaristo and Jenny Offill joining us. You know how it goes now. There's a reading from each of the beautiful novels. There is a film made by each of the authors. Then we'll be in a conversation, and finally a Q&A with your questions. Do just put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll gather them all up together. We will do our best to get through as many as we can, but there are so many coming in, and for that, many thanks. We will just do our best to make sure everybody gets their moment on the screen with Bernie and with Jenny. So tonight we're going to start with Jenny Offill and her beautiful novel, Weather. Jenny is the author of 3 novels, including Department of Speculation, or the Depth of Speculation, I better ask Jenny about that afterwards, which was shortlisted for the Folio Prize in the International Dublin Literary Award, and 4 books for children. She's taught in many leading universities, not least all Columbia and Vassar, and is currently visiting writer at Bard College. Reading from Weather will be Kim Cattrall, who's an author, an actor of screen and stage, a Golden Globe winner, and you'll know her from Sex in the City, Sensitive Skin, and of course, many shows on Broadway and in the West End. So here is Kim Cattrall reading from Weather.
I don't know what to do about this car service man. He told me his business is down and no one uses him anymore, that he had to let drivers go because he's down to 1 car. He sleeps now at work so as to never miss a call. And his wife, he says, she's going to leave him. Mr. Jimmy, that's the That's the name on the card he gave me. I try to use only his services now, not the better, faster one. And sometimes when I call, his voice is groggy. And he says always that he's going to be there in 7 minutes, but it's much longer now. I used to take a car service only when I was running late. But now I find I am building in double the amount of travel time. A bus would be the same or faster. Also, I could afford it. But what if I am the only customer he has left? I'm late for the lecture now, and I was wrong about which building it's in. But by the time I get there, Sylvia is almost through speaking. There's a big crowd, and behind her is a graph shaped kind of like a hockey stick. What it means to be a good person, a moral person, is calculated differently in times of crisis than in ordinary circumstances, she says. She pulls up a slide of people having a picnic by a lake, blue skies, green trees, white people. Suppose you go with some friends to the park to have a picnic. The act is, of course, morally neutral, but if you witness a group of children drowning in the lake and you continue to eat and drink, you have become monstrous. The moderator makes a gesture to show it's time to wrap it up. A line of men is forming behind the microphone. I have both a question and a comment, they say. A young woman stands up to wait in line. I watch as she inches forward. And finally, she makes it to the front to ask her question. How do you maintain your optimism?
I think the inspiration for weather began when I moved out of the city and up to the country. And for the first time, I was noticing really different things. I was used to just walking down a busy street and thinking about all the people on it, thinking about their expressions, thinking about stories behind their lives. And then once we moved up here, I started to just become more aware of the non-human world. Another element was that I began to have conversations over a period of time with a friend of mine who's a novelist, Lydia Millett, who's an environmentalist, and she started telling me all sorts of doomy facts about the climate. And I started to be interested in why I wasn't more interested in a funny way. And that led me down some rabbit holes of research where I kind of became more aware of the climate emergency, as it were. When I was writing the novel, I had a little joke that I would come out of my study and I would say to my husband some nights, I'd say, well, I'm really glad that I'm going to solve climate change by writing this small, weird, experimental novel. Because it did feel absurd in some ways as a way to address my really growing concerns and growing ideas about the need not just for individual action, but for collective action. So one of the promises I made to myself as I neared the end of the book was that I would not just go to marches or do the sort of regular sort of things I'd done, but I became involved in Extinction Rebellion, a writer's version of it in New York with a few other writers. And it's just getting started, just getting up and going. But one of the first initiatives we're doing is something through the Brooklyn Public Library where we're going to do a series of reads about climate, where that's going to be available to anyone who wants to read about it, and then we'll have discussion groups for people. So for me, I felt like I needed to jump in, and one of the ways I talked myself into it is I sort of think we have a need for activism for hypocrites, and I know that that's the category I'm in. So I decided to do what I could with what I had now. The research process for weather was really fun and also really terrifying. I ended up learning all about disaster psychology and a lot of things about preppers, the different ways people are preparing for the end of the world, however they might conceive of it. I'm not someone who writes in long drafts, but I do take incredibly long sections of notes. So I now have quite a doomstead library. I've got when there is no doctor, when there is no dentist, spy secrets that will save your life. All sorts of things like that are now swirling around my head, waiting to be used as I, make my run to pick my daughter up at school. My writing process is, well, in short, it's very inefficient, and don't try it at home is what what I always tell all my students. I tend to write just in a kind of unit by unit bit. So I write sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph, and then I collect them. I think of it almost as like a little bit of a magpie kind of idea, that I collect these different ideas, thoughts, moments, and then the part where I build a nest around them, around these little shiny objects, comes a bit later. I'm often very stuck knowing how they go together, because I want, on the one hand, for them to have a kind of intuitive elegance of how they fit together. On the other hand, I don't want them to be too schematic. So to that end, I sometimes do all sorts of like chance operations. Like sometimes I get these boards and I cut up all the little sections I have and I paste them onto that. I have those boards in my office. And I do that so that I can kind of jostle my brain out of like expected connections. And that's something that I've kind of borrowed from watching visual artists. I notice that they're often a little bit freer about allowing for an element of serendipity to come into their work. But the only good thing about my writing process is that I don't have to do very much revision at the end. It sort of happens as I go. And then at a certain point, the book is taking its shape, and I feel like I can see to the end of the road. This is one of my sort of good luck charms that I keep on my writing desk, and I've had it for probably 20 years now. In a variety of houses and in places that I wouldn't really think of as a proper workspace even. I picked it up at a market in Slovenia, and it is apparently a reproduction of something that was a traditional folk art. I just liked it because I'm such a slow writer, and when I'm writing a novel, it really does feel like I'm walking a snail. And so when I saw that, it just felt to me like something that would remind me that it takes as long as it takes.
That was the most wonderful performance, really, from Kim Cattrall, and a fantastic film from Jenny Offill. Many people are liking the phrase activism for hypocrites. I think that might become a thing as a result of this evening. Next, we have Bernardine Evaristo and her extraordinary novel, Girl, Woman, Other. Benny is the author of 8 novels, including Blonde Roots, which won the Women's Prize Youth Panel Award in 2009. And of course, Girl, Woman, Other, which won the Booker, the Fiction Book of the Year, and her Author of the Year from the British Book Awards in 2019. Bernardine is the first Black woman and the first Black British author to ever win the Booker Prize. And in June 2020, became the first ever Black British author to top the paperback charts. She also writes poetry and drama for radio and stage, and is the Professor of Creative Writing at Brunel University in London, and the Vice Chair of the Royal Society of Literature. Reading from Girl, Woman, Other tonight is going to be Gugu Mbatha-Raw. She's an extraordinary actor of stage and screen. You might have seen her in Doctor Who, in Larry Crow, and very particularly as Nell Gwyn on the stage in London. So, Gugu, take it away.
Today, she will force herself to project a positive approach to her meeting. After all, her shelves are stacked with motivational books ordered from America telling her to visualize the future you want to create. Believe you can and you're halfway there. And if you project a powerful person, you will attract respect. So what will her meeting be? Fan-bloody-tastic. Except she can't help remembering all the little hurts. The business associates who compliment her on being so articulate, unable to hide the surprise in their voices, so that she has to pretend not to be offended and smile graciously as if the compliment is indeed just that. She can't help thinking about the customs officers who pull her over when she's jetting the world looking as briefcased and besuited as all the other business people sailing through customs, unharassed. Oh, to be one of the privileged of this world, who take it for granted that it's their right to surf the globe unhindered, unsuspected, respected. Damn, damn, as the escalator goes up, up, up. Come on, delete all negative thoughts, Carol. Release the past and look to the future with positivity and the lightness of a child unencumbered by emotional baggage. Life is an adventure to be embraced with an open mind and loving heart. But there was that one time, at the start of her career, in a country known for its terrible record on human rights, even though she told them she was to meet a team from their national bank and presented the documentation to show them, which they refused to look at. Even her body was invaded, as if she were an impoverished mule with half a kilo of white powder stuffed up her fanny, or waiting to be evacuated out of the bowels in little plastic bags she obviously must have had for breakfast that morning. The invasion of alien hands in a windowless, dungeon-like room cut off from the flow of the airport, while another grubby immigration official in sweat-stained blue uniform looked on. It brought back such memories. Such memories she'd locked away. It was all she could do not to collapse on the floor of the interrogation room. That had lain dormant for years after it happened. When Carol was 13 and a half, and at her first party with no adults hovering like prison wardens, ruining the fun for everyone. At Letitia's place, whose mum was on a special training weekend for work and whose sister jailer had abandoned her babysitting duties to spend the night at her boyfriend's. Not before ordering Letitia to behave and not to have no mates round upon pain of death or we'll both get busted. So what did Letitia do now she had the place to herself for like the first time in her life? Texted her crew to bring a bottle. And gal them bring man them to even things out. Only those with a six-pack, lol. And they better be buff or you won't be allowed in, you gets? Carol hadn't hitherto been interested in boys. Was labelled the super geek of year 9. Preferred the mind-bending pleasures of mathematical problem solving inspired by her mother Bummy, who was raising her alone after her father died.
Well, I started writing the book simply because I just wanted to create a novel where I could put as many primarily Black British women into it as possible, because I was so aware at the point at which I was writing the book, well, starting to write the book, which was in 2013, that we were just almost invisible in fiction. Because there aren't many of us writing, and nobody else was really putting us in their novels either. So I thought, okay, I'm going to put as many as I can in a single novel and see how that pans out. And I didn't know how many women I was going to create. I did initially had this crazy idea it was going to be 1,000, and then it went down to 100. And then as I started to write and each character was kind of given about 30 pages, I realised, I did the maths and I realised that about 12 would be perfect. And the characters came about very kind of organically. One character would lead to another. And actually the first character I wrote was Carol, who is the 29-year-old banker, working class girl from Peckham, and ends up going to Oxford and has a very different life to the life that she started out with as the daughter of impoverished, essentially, immigrant parents. And then through her mother was revealed and Bummy emerged, and I thought, great, I love Bummy, Bummy's going to be a character. And then her great childhood friend Letitia was also in Carol's story, and so then she had her own section. And that's sort of how it emerged. Characters would appear in each other's stories, and then if I liked them enough and I thought they were important enough, they would get their own sections. In one sense, the novel is the summation of my life experience, everybody I've known. And obviously I'm a black woman, and I grew up in a family with 3 sisters. I went to a drama school where there were lots of other black women, and that has strongly been my identity ever since. And I have known many black women, many black British women. And so when I was writing the book, I was drawing on all the characters that I've known. Perhaps 1 or 2 of them are more kind of closely modelled on people that I've known. But on the whole, they're kind of composites of people at large. When I create characters, I'm really interested in going back into their past. With every novel I've written, you have a very strong sense of the characters, not only as they are in the novel, but also where they came from. And that's, for me, a way in which I can deepen and enrich my characterization so that people have an understanding of their psychology. I track their life journey so that when we see them as a very disgruntled school teacher, or suddenly a very successful theatre director, or as a farmer of a great age who is determined to stay at home and not be put into a care home, we see how they reach that point. And also the other thing to say about the characters is that they all have their own ambitions, and those ambitions might be very different, and they're not necessarily all work related, but they are all ambitious. And so in order for people to be ambitious, we need to get a sense of what's driving them. So I'm very inspired by this photograph, which is on a shelf opposite my desk, and I look at it all day basically when I'm working. And it's a photograph of my father's 2 sisters, and it would have been taken in the 1930s, and I never knew them. And one of them was my father's twin. We have no photographs of my father as a child, but you can see that she looks just like him. So I see my father as a child through this picture. And the reason it's so important is because, as somebody who is of mixed race Nigerian heritage, that's been one of the driving forces for my writing. And I'm so interested in writing stories from black perspectives about black culture and about black history, and that's what I've been doing with all my books. My own personal history was a bit of a mystery from that side of the family, and then it expanded into me wanting to know more about African history and black history. And we weren't taught it in this country, and we're barely taught it today in school. So yeah, so this picture is a huge inspiration for me. And they're 2 women, and I just think they look beautiful, but they look like they're from another world, and they are. You know, Nigeria nearly 100 years ago, but they are, you know, they are my relatives. They're my ancestors as such, and in some ways they are a sort of guiding light for me.
That was another fantastic reading from Gugu Mbatha-Raw. And Bernardine, you will know that all over the chat is people now saying who their favourite of the 12 characters is. So we will start to ask you about this. So ladies and gentlemen, readers everywhere, can you now welcome to your screens Bernardine Evaristo and Jenny Offill? And ladies, if you can turn the, hooray, Jenny, welcome. Lovely to see you. Where are you?
I'm in upstate New York.
Fantastic. Yeah, very good. And here is Bernardine Evaristo. Hello, Benny. Where are you?
I'm in London.
In London. There we are. So, and I'm in Sussex. So that's not a huge arc, but you know, it's good. They were fantastic films. Thank you so much, both of you. I think one of the things that is so marked is that both of you have written novels that are beautiful and clever and full of very, very strong women characters. Bernie, obviously the 12 and others, and Jenny very much Lizzie for me, and also Sylvia. But at the same time, you've written in an experimental way, and you've talked a bit about that. So I wonder if, just starting with you, Jenny, and then Bernie, you described your process as, you know, it sounded almost like shuffling cards, that you had ideas and you'd move them about. How do you know when you've got those cards, those ideas in the right order? Is it like the clunking of a clock or something, and you suddenly realize that everything's in the right order, or does it stay very fluid for quite a long time with you?
I think it stays fluid for a while, but there's certainly a point where I feel like things are falling into place. I don't know if this is what you have in Britain, but in America, we often are given these combination locks when you're in middle school, and they're very stressful because you have to like turn them. Oh, it's 13 here, it's 2 here, it's 7 here. And if you don't get it just right, it won't come open. And that's a little what the feeling is for me. And I'm sort of going back and going forth. And I'm looking for, I think the feeling when it clicks into place is when I feel like, you know, mystery has come into the thing I'm doing, surprise has come in, and beauty. And then it feels like different than the other fragments around it. But as I go forward, it gets more and more tightly wound. So I don't do that as much in the later stages.
Do you suddenly find yourself, you know, like the 13 at dinner with a beautiful section left over that in the end there isn't room for?
Well, I always feel like I'm a little bit like a, you know, my grandmother lived through the Depression, and she was always, you know, saving bits of string and using everything. And I'm sort of like that as a writer. I tend to take copious notes. I mean, I have 300, 400 pages of notes, but a lot of it does make it in. And then there's kind of a little file for who knows where that will go. Sometimes it ends up in another book. Sometimes it's just leftover.
And Bernie, one of the things that's so extraordinary about Girl, Woman, Other is that it is a real page turner. And often when people talk about experimental fiction, you know, they don't expect that to have plot and character and it to be driven forward in that way. Can you just explain a little bit about how you decided to put the characters on the page? Because I found myself, whenever every now and again there was a full stop, feeling like I'd been given a gift. So was that natural, the way that you punctuate and lie on the page in that?
Yes, I think so. Just to say, it's really nice to be here with you, Jenny. And I really enjoyed Weather, and I really love the form that you use. And I really like your sense of humour in it as well. Very dry wit. Yeah, so the form is a form that I used in my previous novel to a certain extent. And I call it a fusion fiction with this novel because when you don't have full stops, you're kind of fusing the sentences together. But when you look at it on the page, it looks a bit like poetry, but it's not really poetry. And I didn't really have poetry in mind. I think the form functions to allow me to tell a lot of story, actually similar to Jenny, because she tells a lot of story, but not that many words. So to tell a lot of story of each of the characters in their chapters, but actually they only have about 30 pages, that you feel like you know so much more of them. And I feel that if I'd have used traditional sentences and full stops, the book would probably read as a series of short stories. And also you wouldn't have all those stories fusing with each other because they are also all interconnected. I loved it. I absolutely loved writing without having to worry about full stops. And somebody came up to me and said that they were dyslexic and they found it really hard to read, but they loved reading the book because they didn't have to worry about the full stops.
That's quite a few comments coming up on the chat saying precisely that, actually. Lucy is saying exactly that same sort of thing. But the thing that I felt about it was almost like going into a party. And so you turn around and you thought, oh, Carol's over there and Letitia's over there, you know, that so you had the swinging eye. In terms of characterization, Jenny, just for you first, you were wonderful about describing your process, but Lizzie herself is a very strong voice. When did she arrive for you? Did she arrive before you started to have the stirrings of wanting to write something about climate? Or is she the person that said, okay, you're writing about climate, you've got some ideas, I'm your girl? Which way round was it?
I think she was here very early. I sometimes start less from an idea and more from an emotion. With my last book, Department, I was thinking a lot about loneliness and how it plays out in different moments in your life. And with this book, I was really thinking about dread. I was thinking about being afraid of losing things and also thinking about kind of questions of responsibility and complicity. But one of the reasons I wanted to have Lizzie be a librarian is one, I'm kind of a librarian fangirl. And secondly, in America, librarians have picked up a lot of the slack of our, completely falling apart social systems. And so there's so many stories that you hear. If you sit in a library and listen to people talking to the librarian, they're advising people on all sorts of things. So I wanted Lizzie to be a porous character, someone who worried not only about her patrons, but also about her neighbors, also about her own family. And then the bigger question is kind of, what does it mean when you're supposed to worry about the rest of the world as well?
Yeah, because she's such a vivid character, but at the same time, as you say, very quietly gentle, always there in that way. Bernie, when you were doing your film and when Gugu was reading, the chat box was going wild with people saying who their favourite character was. And that made me wonder, particularly when you described how one person would lead to another person to another person. Do you have favourites? Did you sometimes feel, oh, I want to give, well, my favourite, Amma, a bit more than I want to give her? They're quite, you're very equal. You've been very equal, but you got any favourites?
Yeah, I answer this question differently depending on my mood, to be honest.
Well, fair enough.
At the moment. But the characters who make me laugh are the characters that I most enjoy rereading. And that would be the 19-year-old character Yaz, because I find her hysterical, and the 93-year-old character Hattie, who's the farmer in Northumberland, because I find her formidable. And she's in a sense, she's this idealized version of a woman of a great age who is fully independent and fully connected to the soil in this country, which is so unusual, and who is incredibly feisty, and she's got her wits about her. And, as an older character, well, a very old character, we don't really get that very often. Often we get older characters, there's something wrong with them mentally or physically or whatever. So I wanted to present this kind of almost mythologized figure. And Amma, who you mentioned, I do like Amma, and I could have written a whole book about Amma, actually. Because I am sort of connected to her. She very much is an exploration of my earlier life as a theatre maker in the 1980s, countercultural, feeling like an outsider and very radical and very angry. And she definitely could have had a whole book. And perhaps some of the other characters if I wanted to, but also some of them I think with Grace, actually. So Grace is no longer alive, and she's living in the 19th century. And I think I probably wrote as much about her as I could, but some of the characters have more scope than others. But I also feel very attached to all of them in different ways.
Yeah, well, it's like, it's children, isn't it? You don't have a favourite, but today your favourite is this one, exactly that. Both of you talked in your films, and I think it's another really marked thing about both of these extraordinary novels, about the power of fiction to really change something. So Jenny, you talked about, the activism for hypocrites, but the idea that was the novel the right thing to do to address climate change? And you have done that with Weather, I would say. You took it further. So that sort of sense that your gift to this debate could be a piece of work, is that something you think you will carry on writing in fiction, or do you think it will actually lead you into non-fiction as well?
Oh, I'm not much of a non-fiction writer. Whenever I write non-fiction, it's always I end up pulling out my hair. I think that what I'm always trying to do with whatever I'm writing, whatever novel, is get on the page what it feels like for me to be alive at a particular moment in time, in history. And so different concerns are sort of ascendant at different times. But one of the things that I love hearing Bernardine talk about too is that each book that you write, I feel like the form kind of comes to you because you have different things that you want to do. And one of the things that I love about being paired with another experimental writer, as they say, so many people are afraid of that. They think, oh, I don't like experimental fiction. And actually they do, because they're imagining that it's not accessible or that there's no way in. And I think that fiction is a way that we get to try on other lives. We get to experience empathy about characters that maybe we're not seeing in our daily lives. And in a world that is so on fire right now, I feel like the chance to quietly learn about lives other than your own is a really important one. And I know that's what I look for in novels, and I love it when the form is also inventive.
Yeah, well, the Women's Prize is not scared of experimental fiction, obviously. You know, it's up the women, and it's all of those things. Bernie, you were nodding through that as well. And I would say that, you know, one of the lovely lines on the back of your book is Britain as you've never read it. And you are actively doing something beyond the scope of the novel as well, is putting the invisible, the unlistened to Black British women on the page in fiction. And that is, you know, you feel that as a purpose as well, in the same way that Jenny is describing.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting, the idea of activism, because I am actually also, I consider myself an arts activist and have been for a very long time. But I've always made a difference between that and my creativity and my own personal creativity. And I don't see my fiction as activist. But actually, if you think about it, I believe in an egalitarian society. I believe in equal rights. I believe in equal opportunity. I think everyone should have a voice, and, you know, I'm a feminist and I'm anti-racist and I'm pro-LGBTQ+, and so on. And all of those things are things that I deal with my activism, but also it's absolutely the sort of, in a sense, the reason why I write. It is to explore those things through my fiction. And so when a book like Girl, Woman, Other, with so many different kinds of Black British women gets out there into the world, I do feel it's making a difference. And that people are, as Jenny was saying, they are encountering people that they may not encounter in their real lives, and not just encountering them, but one of the riches and joys of fiction is that we get deep inside our characters. So they're really deep, inhabiting the characters that we've written and seeing things from their perspective. And so on the one hand, it's fiction, it's characterization, it's story, but at a deeper level, it is perhaps about transformation for the reader as well.
And something I'd maybe add into that as a novelist too, is, Jenny, your lovely phrase, the twilight knowing, is that sometimes people can engage with really big issues of race and of misogyny and of climate change on the pages of a novel where they go in with an open heart and an open mind rather than their set point of view. You know, I feel that both your novels do that. Jenny?
Well, that phrase, I wish I could take credit for it because I love it. But it comes from a book written by a sociologist, Stanley Cohen, and it's from a book called States of Denial, Looking Away from Suffering and Atrocity. And one of the things he's talking about is how, he was specifically talking about apartheid, but I think it goes for any kind of injustice that we see in the world, that there's often a stage where we know and we feel that something is wrong, but we're not looking at it directly yet. We're looking, we're glancing, we're coming away. And I wanted this novel to be about someone who is very much in that twilight state. She is looking away from many things, but she also feels them already. They're already coming through as currents. And I think also when people are perhaps learning, particularly about kind of really complex social issues, that there's a way that we almost take a stutter step. You go forward a little bit, then you go back to the way that maybe you thought. But each time, ideally, there is some increase in empathy and understanding until you reach a point where you no longer want to be complicit in not knowing. You want to stay with the trouble. And I think that was what I wanted to do writing this book was, okay, I'm going to stay with the trouble this time. I'm not going to look away.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of putting it. And I'm going to start taking some audience questions now because there are just so many coming through. But just before I get them from Jen, who's I know gathering them all together, that sense of fiction opening our eyes to things that have been there all along. You know, Bernie, your point about, you know, London, this is a beautiful London book as well, even though it goes out, you know, that all of the voices that you're putting on the pages have been there all along, just not listened to. And that's very important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, it's, I suppose people find it, I don't want to use the word educational because we don't like to think of ourselves as educational writers, but I don't think we do anyway as creative writers. But I do think it's enlightening for people. And certainly the kind of comments I've had is that their eyes have been opened to the people who are around them. And so, you know, the character of Bumi is a cleaner. She actually has a maths degree from Nigeria, but she's ended up a cleaner. And we all know African cleaners, right? And she's one of those people who gets on the bus very early in the morning and cleans the offices and then leaves when everybody's starting to arrive. And then you've got Shirley, who's a school teacher, who, you know, is the kind of person who'll be teaching people's kids, but they won't necessarily know her socially. I think the thing about London is, you know, I love London. I've lived here all my life. Wonderful, multicultural city. And there is quite a lot of integration. But I think there's also a lot of social distancing.
Whoa!
Come from there.
Hey, you're right on it at the moment.
Yeah, that also goes on. And we do stay, you know, London's supposed to be a bubble, but actually London's made up of lots of little bubbles. And so I think a lot of the characters in the book, you know, that Winsome, who is was a bus driver for 40 years, from the Caribbean, you know, a lot of these people are not going to be known to the wider community of the city. And so, but now they are beginning to be known.
Yeah, novels change things. So lots of great questions. So from Barbara Filotti, both of you teach creative writing at universities. How does your teaching influence your writing, if at all?
Well, I have been teaching for many years. I think it influences me in terms of making me want to continue to take risks. It also influences me. I think that it's lucky as someone who's not young anymore to be around young voices and hear what's going on with them. I feel like the ability to write about the climate crisis was partly that I was picking up things from my students, a certain kind of offhand fatalism that I started noticing about 7 or 8 years ago. And I found that people who weren't in the activism circles weren't aware of that. They weren't aware that they hear these college students saying, I'll probably never have kids, or whatever it was. We may be more aware of that now, but it felt like it was, sometimes teaching college students can feel like if you have your antenna up, like you're getting new frequencies. And I love that. And I like to sort of, I think writing is great fun, even though it's very hard. And so I like to kind of not be one of those people that's like, well, maybe you should go to law school. You know, I sort of say like, don't have a backup plan. If this is what you want to do, do it.
Yeah. Bernie.
Yeah, it teaches me how not to do it.
Well, that's the short answer.
Nobody heard it. There's nobody listening, just the people all over the world.
Flannery O'Connor said, do you think that that creative writing programs stop writers? And she sort of said they don't stop enough of them. So I feel like there's that as well.
Yeah, I think through teaching, I mean, like Jenny, I am very inspired by being around young people. I absolutely love it. And, you know, and it does help me keep in touch with that generation, although I have also been teaching a long time. So those generations are now, some of them are now middle-aged actually. But I think essentially teaching kind of refines my practice and helps me develop my own ideas about how literature works best. And I'm a very open teacher. I'm not at all prescriptive. And I do want my students to experiment. And sometimes it's really hard to get them to experiment because
I find that too.
Yeah, they just don't want to take those risks. They think they're going to get marked down. And actually, I just want them to just go crazy. And it's really hard to get them to do that. So I think teaching helps me refine my understanding of literature, but also of how fiction works best. Well, how fiction works well, don't want to use best.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's so interesting. You know, as someone who is very much not an experimental writer, as you know, I'm sort of crash bang wallop. Madeline De Silva says that many writers say during writing a new book, they avoid reading other novels in order to keep them on track for their own. Is that true for both of you?
No, it used to be. It really used to be. But when you're working on a novel, like, you know, this one took 5 years. I mean, you can't spend 5 years not reading anyone else. But years ago, I know how this person feels because or whoever feels, because I do know that years ago I would be overwhelmed by the genius of other writers, and I would read their work and I would just feel so disheartened about my own work. But now, actually, when I'm reading, I really want to be inspired by the writers I'm reading, and actually, it's, you know, it kind of, it motivates me even more to improve my own skills. Yeah. And so, yeah, so that's how it works for me. And also, I do like reading poetry when I'm writing fiction, which helps develop my my use of language.
Yeah, and yes, the beauty of line. Jenny,
mostly poetry when I'm really deeply at work in a book, because I feel like I kind of want that that charge of language, that sense of like what it could do. But I find that I read, of course, I take so long with books, of course I read, but what I don't do is I don't read anything where it feels like something I could write. I read only things that are sort of where they exceed my grasp, because then they're inspiring, and I'm no longer disheartened by them, but I am kind of like motivated when I read something that good.
Because it can be a little demoralizing, I feel, sometimes, yes, when you're doing. This is for Jenny from Alice, who says she loves how you write about marriage. What is it, you know, both in Department of Speculation and obviously in Weather, what is it about marriage that interests you so much as a writer? That's not a personal question. It's a writer's question.
Good question. I mean, I think it is an interesting thing for two people to be together for years and years and years. I remember a story that a friend of mine who's 15 years older than me told me long before I was married. And I asked her some question about marriage, and she said, oh, there's good years and there's bad years. And she had a partnership that was, you know, to me, a very amazing one. And I thought, years? But I, of course, now that I'm married, I think, yes, sometimes it's a horrible year and sometimes it's a good year. But I think that for me, being with someone, and, you know, it's really important to me to kind of like have the same sense of humor and laugh through the dark moments in life. I feel like that has been a really good correction, perhaps, to my natural inclination is for really intense solitude. I mean, I'm an only child. I didn't get married till I was in my 30s. You know, I could live alone in a cabin for years if I hadn't ventured out.
Brilliant. Vernie, there's another question for you. I'm not going to ask you about marriage, because that was, you know, a writer's question, obviously. But Rebecca says that you spoke about the importance of getting the history of the characters right. But how do you decide which parts of the history to put on the page and which to leave out?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, yeah. So I do like to go into my characters' backstories, essentially, and every book I write, there's some aspect of their backstory there. It's very intuitive, but it's also about character formation. So it's about what are the key aspects of somebody's past that has made them the person they are today. And sometimes it's the very dramatic moments, you know, the tragedy and the joys and celebrations, and also the turning points, the experiences they've had that may be traumatic or not, or just dramatic, that have set them on a different path. So those kinds of things, but I don't really think of that consciously. I just think, okay, where was this person born? Who were their families? What kind of childhood did they have? And, you know, as a writer, you've got to give your characters problems. So I just heap the problems onto the characters, make them complex, make them flawed, and then throw it into the mix and see what happens.
Yeah. I was given a good bit of advice once, is that if I found myself describing somebody's socks, by which of course they meant not socks, because I write historical fiction, you have to ask yourself, Kate, why we need to know about the socks. So it's that really, isn't it? Don't throw it all in. A question for you, Jenny, from Alice, saying, did you intend for Weather to be set in the modern day world or in the future, or are you deliberately ambiguous about that?
It actually has a very clear timeline. I mean, it begins before the 2016 election. And then at the end of it, it actually jumps ahead to the election that's going to happen in November. And it's interesting because a lot of things that she's sort of seen as being paranoid about, or kind of like a doomer about, like the chance of violence after the election, or encroaching fascism. I have to say, since the book came out, people are less, I'm getting less questions about why she's so paranoid, and more questions about, you know, what she thinks. So it is set, there is a slight jump forward to it. And I've never done that before. I've never set a book so specifically in a time period, but it did feel after the 2016 election here that if I didn't incorporate that at all, it changed the feeling, the atmosphere so much. And I wanted the book not to be sort of frozen in amber by keeping that out.
Yeah, so that it's the climate anxiety and the political anxiety sort of are right at the heart of it. Bernie, Julie says, and I agree with Julie, I think Girl, Woman, Other could translate very well to the stage.
I agree. And it has been optioned, actually.
Oh, fantastic.
Well, and I just think the casting for that is going to be so wonderful, to have these 12 actors on stage. And it is an experimental novel, so I don't know how they're going to do it. I would never write it. But yeah, no, just to say I agree. It's great. It's a great, it's a great idea. I hope it happens.
And then art becomes life, and then you will be you walking across the bridge towards the National Theatre, and we will all cheer, because that was brilliant. We both talked about poetry, and there's a lovely question that's come up on the screen about what poetry or what particular poets you both particularly enjoy to read.
Well, I have a subscription to a small poetry press in the States that I really like the selection they do. It's called Wave Poetry. And then, you know, I go back to things I've read years and years ago. I go back to Rilke. I go back to Berryman. I go back to like different things. I've been reading Emily Dickinson with my daughter, which has been fun. But I think I'm pretty drawn to period, the New York School period of like Frank O'Hara, and they call it the I did this, I did that poems. I think I'm always really interested in what it means to kind of make the ordinary feel extraordinary, and vice versa. And so I'm always looking for those kind of poets that are interested in that kind of reversal of hierarchies, and how they can do that with such precision in the language.
Bernie.
Yeah, I'm very single-minded when it comes to poetry, and my favourite poet is Derek Walcott, and he has been for about 30 years. And I read him all the time, actually. And then in terms of contemporary writers, there are some of my peers, Roger Robinson, Inwa Ellams, Derek Owusu, who are all publishing at the moment. And they're all Black British guys, and they are writing the most extraordinary poetry, and writing about things and from a perspective that we really never hear about in this country. And I find them incredibly inspiring. Yeah,
really, really powerful. And there's quite a few questions. We're nearly out of time. Quite a few questions are coming in about the Women's Prize and previous winners and books you might or might not have read. And I'm not going to put you on the spot because that's not fair. But I just wonder if, given you're both teachers, as well as being obviously very successful, and Bernie, you are having the year of all years at the moment. I wonder if you just could say something about, for you as writers and for you as inspiring other writers, the place of prizes in all of this, because in the end you must write what you want to write. It's important that you don't, you know, get pulled off by, I must write in this way in order to do this or the other. But what part do prizes play in the literary ecology, I suppose?
Well, sorry. Go ahead. I mean, they can really boost somebody's career for sure. But you know, also the reason for this prize was to raise the profile and shine a spotlight on women's fiction. And so I think some prizes do more than just celebrate an individual writer's career. I set up a prize, Brunel International African Poetry Prize, and one year we gave the prize to 3 people, because the whole idea is to develop African poetry. So I know a lot of people are very kind of like skeptical about prizes, but they do, if a prize is managed well, it's not just the winner who is celebrated, it's also actually the shortlist and to a certain extent the long list. So I think they're a really good part of the culture. Yeah. In the way that they shine a light on different aspects of literature, because each prize does a different thing.
And all the questions that people are posting and comments in the chat box shows that readers want to hear and have this engagement in a broad spectrum of writing, which is fantastic. Jenny, what do you feel? Does that chime with what you feel about prizes and awards and bursaries?
There's a way in which I know over the years I've definitely read the long list and short list of the Women's Prize. It can be something that kind of it gives you a list especially if you're trying to read widely and you're not sure, but you feel like, I really trust this particular prize. I like who they picked in the past. I also think though that there can be too much of a sense of that I think there's always an element of luck in prizes. There's always a prize jury. There's always, somebody may hate this thing and love this thing. And so I object to it only in the sense of kind of, this is the best, this is the one that you should pay attention to, because I feel like, whereas a short list or a long list really gives you a sense of what's happening in that contemporary moment. A prize itself may just kind of be about the personalities that chose it, and maybe what a voice that they really want to hear that year that maybe they haven't been hearing enough of.
Yeah, we've come to the end of our time, but it's a lovely place to stop, in that this was precisely the point of setting up the Women's Prize so many years ago, was to shine a spotlight on a diverse range of writing by women. Lots of women, the idea of just getting a bigger and bigger table and putting the classics of tomorrow in the hands of readers today, and absolutely promoting a long list and a short list as a body of women, all of us standing together, supporting each other, because every list, there will be somebody that you will have read, somebody you have heard of but haven't read, and somebody probably you knew. And of course, the idea is it's the class of 2020, the class of 2019. And that's why we've been doing the Reading Women campaign. Is, there are so many wonderful books. The idea, all of us as working novelists, that you read a book the second it comes out, we know that's not true. And it's wonderful, Bernie, seeing all of your backlist right out there, all now matching. It's just a wonderful thing. I'm really sorry that we've got to bring it to an end. You've both been so generous and so inspiring about both your writing, but also the wit in your books. It's quite clear listening to you where all of this comes from. I've got to do the usual thank yous, of course, but I'm going to start with thanking everybody who's listening all over the world to these events. It has been so great that you have really engaged with this, been so warm, and your questions have been fantastic. But also, it's great to know that the idea of access, many of you are saying the reasons why you would never be able to come to an event like this. This is fantastically important, because all readers matter, and the more we can do like this. So thank you for being here and supporting these 3 events. Of course, I must thank our wonderful sponsors, Fremantle and Bailey's and NatWest. I'm also, because it's the last one, going to thank the anonymous donor. Some of you will not know this, but when I was setting up the prize 25 years ago, many people setting up the prize, at that stage, I did an interview on the radio, and somebody heard me talking about it, and I was rung up, and a very elderly lady said, reading has been my great passion, and I would like to anonymously endow the prize in perpetuity, to give the prize money to a woman who writes. And because I had that money and we had that money, it meant that we could then go and have a conversation. So I'd like to just pay tribute to, she's gone now, but that anonymous donor, and also the person also gone, Grizzle Niven, the sculptress, as she called herself, the sculptor, who gave us the cast of the Bessie, also a woman who died at the age of 100. So it was 2 much older women who supported a whole group of young women trying to do this. So thank you to all, and to everybody who's played part in the prize. Tomorrow night is the night. You will all meet everybody online. Martha Lane Fox will be there live to do this. Please remember that it's 7 o'clock, not 7:30, because if you tune in at 7:30, you're going to miss it. So that would be very disappointing. But thank you again to Jenny Offill and for Bernardine Evaristo for bringing these 3 nights of shortlisted readings to such an amazing end. Now from Sussex, from upstate New York, from London, for all of you, wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Women's Prize for Fiction 2020 shortlist. Tomorrow we will hear who the 25th winner of the Women's Prize is. Good night and have a fantastic evening wherever you are. Good night.
Good night, everyone.